The consciousness and the cosmos, a path to one's own inner cosmos.
In assistance of the more profound understanding of the current planetary transition.
A stimuli
that accompanies the pilgrim in his return
to his cosmic home.
The Consciousness and the Cosmos radio program of Uksim, Planetary Service Center.
Hello dear listeners, my name is Jez.
My name is Arawinak. We will be hosting the program.
Today's topic is, are there long ways and shortcuts in the path of spiritual growth? Do we need to seek perfection?
No, el camino largo sería buscar la perfección, porque el trabajo de la personalidad y el carácter es una oportunidad que la energía ofrece tanto en el camino largo como en el corto. Lo que no quiere decir que estar atento para que pulamos nuestro carácter y nuestra personalidad.
Daniel says the long path is to seek perfection. Polishing our personality is a journey that can be approached in both the long and short term. Focusing on developing our character and personality does not mean we have to choose one path over the other, and that does not mean by any means seeking perfection, which is currently unattainable. This opportunity is not possible anymore. The transition has already accelerated sufficiently, and those who strive for perfection will not even have time to prepare because it does not work that way. What the short path offers is that we have the capacity to make a shift in terms of consciousness, and that this is reflected as soon as possible in our treatment of everything, nothing else. There is no time to seek perfection, and we should not. We stress relate the polishing of character and personality to one of the two paths. But in both, it has to be fulfilled. It is the practical context of what we have to do, whether we take left or right. It is what we are going to have to do in the end. Both paths lead to the inner connection. On the long path, there are more protocols, more linked to the previous cycle, where some beliefs and issues of the pre-1988 stage are usually present.
En ambos caminos se desemboca en la conexión interna. En el camino largo existen protocolos más ligados al ciclo anterior, ¿sí? Donde algunas creencias, algunas cuestiones.
Daniel Gagliardo continues. The short path illustrates our understanding of the planetary situation. We recognize that we are in a transitioning phase, which is both accelerating and nearing its conclusion. It is clear that the approach we take to explore our inner life must differ from that of the previous cycle. Many people recognizing that we may have experienced multiple incarnations in the past. However, those of us who are more spiritually aware understand that we cannot reincarnate with the same genetic code or under the current conditions of the planet. Those who disincarnate now will return to a very different world if they come back to Earth, or they will face different conditions if they do not come back to Earth.
Entonces, siempre el ser, más o menos conscientemente, está buscando la vida interna. Pero la energía que lo rige en cada ciclo de etapa, el polo que lo rige, el contexto de cosmicidad que lo rige, va a estar alimentándole en él una concepción particular para esa etapa de lo que es la búsqueda interna.
Daniel says, so the beginning is always more or less consciously searching for inner life. However, the energy that governs it in each cycle and stage, the pole that governs it, and the context of cosmicity that governs it, will be nurturing a particular concept of the inner search for that stage. The conception, the energy of cosmicity sustained by the feminine base at this moment is feeding us to understand that in a totally different way. So, on both paths, there is an inner search. Only in one there is a particular added value, such as knowing that the planetary situation is being defined, it is accelerating. In Casilda, we talk about the space-time contraction that is taking place, and this whole process, depending on who we are talking about, is going to have one connotation or another at the level of consciousness. If we did some things in the previous cycle, it was right because the structures of externalization are the ones that supported the whole cleansing process of the inner search. If we do it today, it is to be very centered within ourselves, because the feminine energy is inviting us to understand that this short way means another way, to go in search of the essence, the inner life, the knowledge of the inner laws. It has possibilities that we didn't have before. If there is an advance in the transformation of our character, it is because we are becoming more flexible. The character is the consequence of a relationship which has thousands, millions of nuances, but which not only has to do with the personality, but with the ego itself. The relationship of the ego with the personality that is in charge of in that incarnation to rehearse whatever it is, and the character that is the consequence, the summation, the synthesis of what is the evolutionary living from incarnation to incarnation, is a very dynamic process that we can see it from one side or another, according to what each one of us is in a position to observe.
La concepción, la energía de cosmicidad, sustentada por la base femenina, en este momento nos está alimentando para entender eso de un modo totalmente diferente. Entonces, en los dos caminos hay búsqueda interna, solo que en uno hay un valor agregado tan particular como saber.
However, the formation of this triangle cannot occur without a static field, and the other aspects cannot become more flexible. This is impossible. Therefore, when a personality becomes more adaptable and receptive, it is able to respond more deeply to its inner life. When the ego attains a certain level of maturity, it can harmonize with the inner self and present it as a revelation of the personality. This process will naturally impact character. This process will naturally impact, as expansion implies increased flexibility.
Que la situación planetaria se está definiendo, que se están acelerando. En Casilda hablamos de la contracción espacio-temporal que se está dando, y todo ese proceso, según de quién estemos hablando, va a tener una connotación o otro nivel de conciencia, ¿no?
All of the components in the flexibilization become more translucent, permeable, receptive, and dynamic in responding to whatever it is they have to respond to. There is always a relationship and a parameter that expands in each of those three fields: character, personality, and ego. How good it would be if we only had 10 things. To be shown 10 is so that our collapse does not flourish. First, we must understand that self-observation is an internally perfected, regulated process. If it is not internally regulated perfectly and precisely, it is not self-observation, but speculation about ourselves. Self-observation is a protocol that should result from attunement and receptivity from internal stimuli that come and seek to show us something in particular, in this case about ourselves. Self-observation and self-knowledge result from the inner influence, that is, from the space and the place, symbolically speaking, that we give to the inner influence that seeks to show something in particular to my consciousness. In this case, it refers to my consciousness because inner life continuously seeks to instruct and stimulate us to learn, to accept what comes from it. And in terms of self-observation and self-knowledge, it's about ourselves, but it is always a revelation. Now, if you show us 10 things, it's good that you show us 10, 5, 3. What will also happen, in most cases, in a general way, is that together with the revelation that will allow us to deepen who we are, to know ourselves better, to observe ourselves better, the stimulus itself will cooperate with us by showing me what the priority order, at least, of some of those 10 things, which ones we should work on first.
Autoobservación y el autoconocimiento resultan de la influencia interna, que es decir, del espacio, del lugar, simbólicamente hablando, que le demos a la influencia interna que busca mostrar algo en particular a mi conciencia, y en este caso es referente a mi propia conciencia, pues la vida interna está buscando continuamente instruirnos, estimularnos, que aprendamos a...
In this case, the work needed to refine and polish one's personality cannot be initiated from just any element. Generally, our inner life rarely reveals to us more than a few key aspects at the time, let's say 10. If it shows you 10 things, it likely has even more insights to clarify your priorities. It is important to recognize that neither you nor I nor anyone else should presume to start with something that is not a clear priority. Just because there are 10 possibilities doesn't mean we should randomly choose one to focus on. Automatically, the disorder of the factors alert to outcome, so we can move forward in a predisposition for the inner life to reveal issues that are very important in self-knowledge and self-observation. Perhaps the ego, at least at that stage, would not dare to consider them as its own. The ego must receive acceptance and consideration before embarking on a journey of self-observation and self-knowledge. We must understand this process can bring forth a range of emotions and insights, some of which may be quite uncomfortable. We need to be strong enough to accept that it is our own energy that reveals these aspects of ourselves.
El ego tiene que tener esa consideración, esa aceptación. Antes de comenzar un trabajo de autoobservación y autoconocimiento, tenemos que saber que de ese trabajo puede emerger cualquier cosa. Y cuando decimos cualquier cosa, pueden ser cosas muy desagradables.
Therefore, we can move forward in the predisposition so that the inner life in terms of self-knowledge and self-observation can reveal issues that are really very important and that the ego, at least at that stage, would not dare consider as its own. The ego has to have that acceptance, that consideration, before starting a work of self-observation and self-knowledge. We have to know that anything can emerge from that work, and when we say anything, it can be very unpleasant things, and we have to be firm enough to accept that it is us, the energy, that is going to show us that it is us. Remember this text. That is part of who we are. If we accept who we are, the energy will continue to move forward, leading us to a path of synthesis. Self-knowledge and observation are crucial for progress. Understanding ourselves and being able to see ourselves allows us to economize on issues. If the ego does not accept itself, cannot see itself, has no genuine knowledge of itself, and cannot observe itself, it cannot make progress. Without knowing it, you have backpacks full of stones, so the energy does not say, be perfect and start walking. The energy says, look at yourself, know yourself. The one who manages to do that manages to accept the inner influence, to see what he has to see, because the inner influence is not going to show us anything that we don't have to see. That's what we are there for, to look where we don't need to look. We are there. To look where we need to look is only the effect that the inner life can offer us, because we always divert our attention everywhere. And from being able to see ourselves to accept what life shows us, life leads us to an instructive process of knowledge based on what we have seen and accepted, because no one can know themselves if they don't first accept what life is showing them.
First, you must accept what life reveals to you about yourself. When you are open to these lessons, life instructs you, allowing you to know yourselves more deeply. This self-knowledge is an integral process. As life reveals aspects of your ego and personality, it simultaneously uncovers parts of yourself that the ego might never discover. The subtle, hidden, and silent counterpart that exists within everything you are, including your flaws.
That is why self-knowledge is a huge step, starting from self-observation, because the self will start to be nourished with the revelation of what it really is, but without the absence of the inner, eternal, omnipresent component that even in the worst of us is there, because we could not be. If even in the worst of us the essence is not present, the energy is not present.
In light of what has been discussed, I understand that the fundamental transformation involves addressing the interplay of forces and the duality within us.
Porque lo que busca la energía, ¿sí?, al fundamentar el acceso a lo que somos, a conocernos, a poder vernos realmente, lo que busca es economizar cuestiones. Porque si el ego no se acepta, no se puede ver, no tiene un conocimiento genuino de él, no puede observarse, ¿cómo hacer un camino corto?
It is one of the tools of transformation. To the extent that a being continues to be complicit in the play of forces offered by the complicit three-dimensional karmic field, he cannot transform himself, because what he is conforming is what has been guiding him, in inverted commas, although it may seem a contradiction, has been guiding him since his passage through the mineral kingdom, which was integrally being in one way or another in relation to the play of forces in the mineral, in the vegetable, and in the first stages of the human kingdom, and already advanced towards the average of the human stages. It has always continued to conform its relationship with the forces of matter, with the three-dimensional karmic field.
So what does transformation mean in a karmic context?
Daniel says to break that link, which by this time we should have taken full advantage of, but to have interrupted it, that is to say, what is the sublimation of the link with the three-dimensional forces, to sever it, because at some point in the karmic field of existence, the sublimation in the karmic context of the three-dimensional forces is to break the link, the complicity within them. So there, the law of karma can fulfill, if only symbolically with a few, what the hierarchy has been saying, that the law of karma has all the capacity to bring us to the threshold of cosmic life, precisely because we cannot transform ourselves, and it is precisely an act of practical spirituality, basic but genuine, to break that complicity with the forces of matter.
Could we say that involutionary forces attempt to fill the space of our soul?
Clearly, they don't know what the soul is, but they try to occupy the space that our consciousness, by lack of attunement, leaves as an empty space. What does our consciousness do with or without objectivity? It leaves a big empty niche that has to be occupied by inner life, inner laws, inner attunement, alignment, receptivity, and inner vocation. If that niche is empty, it is occupied by the involutionary forces. How many people are in an illusion, in a fantasy, believing they have a spiritual life, and in reality are puppets of the dissuasive forces? Why? Because in their life and in the framework of which they are part of the planetary, they are in an absolute illusion, believing that they are spiritual, when in reality, at that moment, or up to that moment, what they did was a back and forth with the forces of matter, which can disguise themselves as anything.
When we experience friction in our lives, we tend to focus our energy on opposing forces rather than nourishing our inner life.
Friction to a certain degree, because while one is in a karmic experience, there are always levels of friction, psychophysical friction. The issue is when those levels of psychophysical friction are out of control, because one of the experiences of karmic sublimation is that those levels of psychophysical friction serve in a field where the being applies what they are internally receiving as instruction. He applies it in his own consciousness in a widening spiral. He applies it in the context where he is inserted on a planetary level. So the problem of friction is when it occupies everything. But when we are at the stage where we are perceiving friction through moving through friction objectively, perceiving friction, what is starting or what is happening with that frictional fire, then we reinforce alignment and attunement. In that reinforcement of alignment and attunement, we are reaching a work of neutralization, of lessening that friction that influences us. The theme for the next program is: what is the correct approach to inner stimuli? And how does the being progress in that from the moment it starts receiving stimuli up to its externalization? How does one live this impulse and apply it in his daily life? What is the process of transformation, impulses, and intuition?